Hello, this is Andrew Petersen from the last but one day for this COP goer at COP15. And welcome to G'day Montreal. Today, got a great lineup of speakers that I will introduce in a minute, but I just wanted to highlight tomorrow will be the last G'day Montreal, and we will be having our dear colleagues Ava Zabi, who's just spoken at a session, which you will hear about in a minute, on the Jeff Pavilion, and Bianca Brazil, who is the lead of the Global Partnership on Biodiversity and Business, or Business and Biodiversity. I always get that wrong. But today, a stellar team of, and in the order that I will get totally wrong, Matthew Reddy, put your hand up. Rayne Vandenberg, put your hand up. And finally, people, Tony Goldner. Goldner. I'm saying Goldner. Thinking of somebody else.
Yeah, you're thinking of Tony Goldner.
I'm thinking of Tony Goldner. Don't go there, Andrew. Sorry, Tony.
That's all right.
So, people, first question that we ask every single day, is this your first COP? Matthew?
No, it's not my first COP, but it's a delightful COP. This Montreal COP, you know, it's great to be in Canada. I think the hosts have done a wonderful job.
They have.
I mean, this is the way to run a COP.
Yes.
It really is.
Well, we had our Australian Environment Minister thanking the COP hosts this morning at an event, thanking both the Chinese and the Canadians for an incredibly well-run COP. And I think we all agree this is a very well-run COP.
And considering all the challenges that existed in the lead up to this COP, I mean, this COP was supposed to happen in 2020.
Yes.
If people remember.
What happened back in 2020?
That was the super year of, there was some biodiversity outbreak.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so it's not your first COP. Is your first biodiversity COP?
I went to the one in 2012, was it?
Okay, so this is your second.
Second or third.
Right, okay.
There was one in Japan, remember? And then
yes.
And then
Nagoya.
And then there was another one, I think, in the Middle East somewhere.
Oh, you've done well.
There was Sham.
There was Sham.
No, I didn't go to Sham. I didn't do that one. My colleagues went to that one. But,
okay. So it's not your first biodiversity COP, and it's certainly not your first COP.
No.
Done. Tony, certainly not your first COP, I know that, but is it your first biodiversity COP?
It's my first biodiversity COP.
Snap. Thank you.
I've done a sand COP and a snow COP.
Oh, I like. Oh, I'm using that. Oh, that's good. That's very good. Okay, so pivot from that, and this is how. Well, we'll go back to you, Tony. And why are you here? Who are you representing? And what have you been doing while you're here, which has been amazing? Go.
I am representing the Taskforce on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures.
Yep.
We are building a framework for corporate and financial institution reporting on nature risk. Huge interest in Australia, which is terrific.
Yes.
And we have been flying the flag, trying to raise awareness.
More than that.
Shifting the conversation on the data topic, which everyone seems a bit stuck on. There's no data. In fact, there's oceans of data.
Yeah.
And we've been running a series of events across the street at one of the hotels here, and banging down the door to get in. In fact, they called hotel security yesterday for one of the sessions because we were in breach of a fire code violation because of the number of people rushing in to come and hear about nature-related data. So
Groupies at a TNFD for a fun.
It was fantastic.
Oh, that is so cool. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Get out of the way, Alicia Keys. All right. Well, you can put that on your CV.
It was a moment. It was a moment.
Now, that leads me to Rayne. Which ones did you go to?
We could go to some of the TNFD
meetings.
It's been amazing to engage with the leadership coming out of Australia.
Yep.
And just where we're placed in the global stage.
Yep.
We're very excited to be part of the pilot to try and demystify what this looks like for business.
Yep. When's that going to start?
So in the new year.
Yep.
So we've done a lot of work, but we're going to go back and make sure that the language is consistent and ready for disclosures.
Yep.
And looking to be a case study for what a real disclosure would look like.
So exciting work in progress for 2023. To both of you, this COP, quite amazing for business and finance. Tony, did you think it would be as, and I'm going to call it successful because I think it has been. Do you think did you think when preparing for this, it would be as successful for the prosecution of the TNFD work at this COP?
So I've got two co-chairs.
Yes.
One of them also happens to be running COP15, Elizabeth Moran.
Yes.
And I was tipped off about 6 weeks ago that there were now going to be over 1,000 business delegates attending. And I believe at the last one in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was 30, including one financial institution. And they were wondering where they were going to go to dinner together because they were sort of the vast majority of the audience. Now we've got 1,000 business and finance representatives.
Yep.
So we knew there'd be huge interest.
Yep.
But, I think the negotiators had a tough time on a number of issues. The business and finance here in droves, and they're very keen to engage and to see progress.
Yep.
So hopefully that pressure from business and finance is going to translate into an ambitious framework, but we'll find out in the next few days how ambitious it'll be.
Yes, exactly. Stay tuned for that one. Same question to you, Matthew. You're here as part of the Jeff. Give us a quick précis of who the Jeff is, and the same question. Did you think this would be as successful as it's clearly turned out to be?
So the Global Environment Facility is a multilateral fund, very, very well supported by Australia and indeed New Zealand, and has been for a good many years. And Jeff is now 30 years old, over 30 years old.
It looks pretty good for 30.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
You're looking remarkably.
And I think for us at the Jeff, when we came to this biodiversity COP, we did have high expectations. We did have the view that, especially from the business sector, that there would be some, raising of the ambition, which then gives the negotiators confidence. If all of the business is saying mandatory disclosures, incorporate TNFD, let's build national biodiversity action plans in a co-creation way with business. That's the kind of message that business brought. That's going to help the negotiators and hopefully move things in the right direction in an ambitious way. And we've heard also about resource mobilisation.
Yes.
That's been a hot topic. If people online have been following, resource mobilisation is really focused on financial resources, not all the other things that the private sector can bring, which are numerous. But on the subject of the money, we've seen even larger commitments, not only from companies but from governments. And Canada today announced another couple of $100 million to support Jeff and biodiversity. So really strong support for increasing not only the level of ambition, but the cash that's needed to back that up as well.
Okay. So what have you witnessed, the three of you, in the last week and the business has brought to the COP? So who wants to go first? Rayne, you go first.
I think what we haven't brought is just as important. We haven't brought any lobbying, it doesn't feel, roadblocks.
Right.
So if anything, there's support, broad-based support for what's happening here. And I think that's thrown the negotiators a little bit. They're surprised, pleasantly surprised. But the sheer volume of ambition coming from the NGOs, Indigenous and business all talking the same language is, for me, really exceptional.
Yep. Matthew.
Yeah, I think one thing that people don't recognise is the level of technical expertise that business has.
Yep.
So, in the forest sector, in the mining and resources sector, which are two very important sectors for Australia, the level of knowledge about biodiversity, the level of capacity within those organisations is actually probably greater than exists in government. So this knowledge resource that business has to be able to, support biodiversity strategies. And the other thing I would say about the business is they're bringing solutions. They're not lobbying, right? There's no placards. There's no kind of let's not make biodiversity a focus. There isn't the oil and gas sector here trying to push things in the other direction. It's all positive, and I think that's really something that's special about this COP.
Well, that's quite interesting you say that, because in 2005, this was the venue for another COP, which was COP11. And I can remember being at that COP, and the very thing that you just mentioned was actually happening. There was representatives of a number of fossil fuel-based sectors who were here to block, and they were also from Australia. And I just can't get over the sea change.
Yeah.
You've got, I think, a very transparent group of companies that have said this is what they want. They want to have a discussion about dismantling subsidies. They want to have a discussion about mandatory reporting, and they want it to be credible, cognizant of the global south. That's been a big conversation I've heard in the last couple of days as well.
And Indigenous people.
And Indigenous people, yeah. So, Tony, same question to you. What have you seen business bring, particularly to the work that the forum's been doing at the COP?
I'd say a lot of curiosity.
Yeah, right.
I'd agree with Rayne. I think the fact that we've gone from 30 to 1,000 in 4 years, and a lot of, by definition, nearly all of those people are here for the first time. Many of them are new in their jobs.
Yep.
They weren't working on these issues 4 years ago. I think there's a huge amount of curiosity here. So I agree. There's a lot of curiosity. There's a lot of desire to see clear targets set by coming out of this process, so everyone knows what the goalposts are and what to shoot for.
Ignore the other person talking.
I think it's now about moving to action. So I would expect there's a lot of interest to see what will come out of the next few days in terms of clear targets. But business is restless to get to nature-based solutions, not just better risk management, but also on the opportunity side of the equation.
Yeah.
And I would fully expect in the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see a real acceleration off the back of COP15. Whether or not there's actually an ambitious set of targets, I think the train's left the station.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah,
you raise a good point, Andrew. That at the very start, the genesis of the GEF was Rio.
Yep.
1992. There were no businesses at Rio, right? That's why the WBCSD started.
Correct.
It was the fact that there wasn't a business presence
right.
in the Rio conventions that spurred business leaders to come up with a concept.
It started 6 months after the Rio Earth Summit. Right. Having said that, Sustainable Business Australia actually started 6 months before the Rio Earth Summit, and we like to rub that into the WBCSD whenever we can. So we're just much older than everybody else. Yeah. But I want to pick up on Tony's point about whether or not there is a policy or agreement out of this. And it's been a very interesting observation from WBCSD, Business for Nature, and certainly Capitals Coalition, that you've got a throughput of business action, accountability, and ambition, and I use those three words deliberately, that seems to be the throughput that will go on. Obviously, having that Paris Agreement moment is going to be seminal for a larger group of businesses and arguably sectors, but you're not going to see any appetite wither as a result. So you turn that into it's positive. There's still massive momentum that will occur. Agree, disagree, amplify.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right.
And the pressure's coming from investors on companies.
That's
regardless of how ambitious governments are, people are here trying to listen and learn. And I think a clear set of policy targets from governments would be really helpful as a North Star. But even if we walk away from here a bit disappointed in the next few days, investors are now asking questions of companies, and that's driving the momentum.
I mean, the Finance Day went from zero to hero, and to suddenly have a Finance Day where it was never talked about, and we're at the 15th COP of this negotiation, to have a finance conversation which had not just private but public finance ministers and MDBs was extraordinary. Now, whether they got enough done is another question, but the fact that they're here and they're talking. What about Jeff? What's your take around this momentum issue? You've obviously got biodiversity as a key element of Jeff 8, which you might want to explain. And what does that mean for the next couple of years for the program of work for Jeff?
Yeah, I'd say that our program work aligns to the horizon, the 2030 horizon. Yep. So for us, it's a much more of a long-term planning cycle.
Yep.
So Jeff 8, as you mentioned, is our replenishment. So that's the recapitalisation of the Jeff fund.
Oh, so congratulating you.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. So every 4 or 5 years, we have a new investment cycle from the donors. As I mentioned, Australia is a superb donor to the Jeff.
Yep.
And then we invest that money in developing countries, and biodiversity is our largest focal area.
Right.
So if we were to look at climate change, chemicals and waste, it's actually biodiversity that takes up the largest share of that funding. I think the momentum here, I see a sort of a cascading momentum. And so we must take this global framework back to country.
Yes.
There's the global biodiversity framework, but biodiversity isn't global generally. It's local,
very local,
yeah. and no greater example than in Australia,
in our beloved country.
So we need then to be able to make sure that those ambitious targets are translated into local action, and that the resources mobilised, not just mobilised at the global level, but they're mobilised at the local level, and we can empower organisations like Landcare to be able to do that sort of work.
So let me pick up on that, because we haven't actually told the viewing audience that you are also Australian.
Yes.
Yes. So it's actually a full Aussie panel.
Right.
And I haven't asked this of anybody else thus far, but what do you as Australians think this is going to mean for Australia? It's a bit of a cheap question because it's got nothing to do with business per se. Right. But what do you think it means for Australia?
It's an amazing opportunity for Australia. The competitive advantage that comes out of Australia. What I've been so overwhelmed with is the innovation and where we are placed on the global stage in some of, it's almost like there's been this resistance movement in Australia where business and tech companies and all these different players, NGOs, etc., have been doing all this work. And now we're here and showing it.
Well, you're three of them. Come on, let's call it what it is. And this is the thing. It's like a pearl that's not really been varnished and shown to the rest of the world. We have so many people in so many different aspects of this narrative that's not shared.
You are right, because Australia is actually quite a fair way ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
All this work that's been done at the state level with various net gain schemes, biobanking schemes, those imperfections that we can iron out over time.
Yep.
That's given Australia a huge advantage because other countries haven't done that.
No. They're asking us how we've done
it. Exactly.
And there was the agreement signed yesterday between the US and Australia.
They're learning from us.
Natural capital accounting.
I love it.
Right.
Of which we have a leading corporate proponent. But what's interesting is Australia and the US are the only two, I believe, OECD countries that are also classified as megadiverse regions. So you have an intersection between the wealth and capabilities of countries like Australia and the skills that we have to figure out what the solution should be, and the fact that we have a self-interest in applying those solutions in our own countries because we're mega diverse. I agree with Rayne. I think we this should be the beginning of a huge opportunity curve for Australia. And part of my mantra has been if we think of nature as an asset, which I think is now pretty well understood, that we should be investing in assets the way we invest in infrastructure.
Yep.
And if you think about infrastructure as an investment model, that's something Aussies know how to do really well because we've been doing it for 30 years. And that's the premise on which we could be pioneers in architecting the project finance, essentially, for nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more. And we can pioneer those solutions at home, and then we can export those services around the rest of the world.
Yes.
There's another policy that's actually quite innovative that comes out of Australia. People probably don't realise this, but outside of Australia, people can't believe that Australia doesn't have subsidies in agriculture. Australia and New Zealand. We don't. They think,
EU it certainly does, in the US.
Subsidies, right? You've got the Farm Bill coming out in the US in another cycle coming soon. So having this whole idea of eliminating negative subsidies. Sure, there's negative subsidies in the oil and gas sector, but in other areas, we don't have to dismantle whole infrastructure to then put in nature-positive subsidies.
Good point.
So, Australia, again, is ahead of the curve there by virtue of wise policy decisions in the 80s and the 90s to reduce our reliance on subsidies. Will help us make that transition a lot easier as well.
So not dismantling the bad, but they're building actively the positive carrot.
And there's some great ones. The carbon scheme layered on with biodiversity, for example, is a great example of that.
But even biodiversity credits, which have got a lot of attention here at this COP, and also in Sharm el-Sheikh, by the way, where all business was talking about was nature-based solutions at a climate COP, which is also very interesting. But Australia's been pioneering some of the biodiversity credit stuff with the New South Wales government. The federal government's now come out with a position on it. So it's just another frontier in which we could be pioneering the solution set that then gets replicated around the world.
Exactly. And the thing I like about it is that the government is underpinning it. It's not necessarily overly regulating it. It's looking to be a key player in ensuring the credibility and integrity of it. Yes, there's been challenges at a federal level in relation to that over the last few months. But that, to me, is a recognition of the maturation of that market into its next phase and what it needs if it's going to be highly credible in I would expect, an NDC that's going to have to be far more ambitious than it is at the moment. And that's going to be interesting for the conversation around a national nature roadmap, because how do those two play together? And that's where I want to go to next, about this interface between climate and nature, and your collective observations about what you're hearing and seeing over the last few days around that conversation. Because it came up at Charm as well, didn't it?
Yeah,
you just mentioned it. What's your observation about it here, though, this time?
Well, I think with such a strong business presence here, everyone in business is saying you've got to introduce this agenda on nature where we are on climate today.
Yeah, right.
So meet us where we are and take us on a journey into the understanding the nature space.
Right.
So one of the tools to do that is around climate-related reporting and TCFD.
Yep.
So now TNFD is a little sister of TCFD.
Oh,
Maybe the big brother. I don't know. Pick your relationship.
Pretty well during the HSC, I'd have to say. So I don't know if she's the little sister anymore.
So,
twins.
so maybe they're twins. Yeah. Somebody said, "Who's the parent and who's the child?"
Well, exactly. And then just remind everybody what the ISSB did this week with TNFD.
Well, they announced that they're going to be using TNFD as input into their own thinking on nature, which is going to start next year, which is welcome. And interestingly, to your point about the link to climate, they're going to start where nature issues are most proximate to the climate. So we often, within the sustainable finance bubble that I live in, we often talk about as the climate-nature nexus.
Right.
So what are the issues that are tightly at the intersection of the two, and then take people beyond that into sort of nature-based solutions and biodiversity credit markets and things. So,
and that gets me excited.
I was going to say
that nexus
yes.
where the solutions are.
Exactly.
And there's lots of conversations around nature-based solutions.
Yeah, and I was really encouraged by the statement of the Treasurer this week.
Yes.
That the government's going to move to mandatory TCFD adoption. But what was great for us was in the very next paragraph, he said, well, we're watching what's happening on nature and we think nature's coming next. So that statement in itself, and I think this is easy for Aussies to lose sight of, because we're sort of digging our way out of, 20 years of complex politics on climate and making a lot of good progress in the last 12 months or so. But that statement in itself has already positioned the Australian government in a front-running position in terms of thinking about climate and nature disclosures, just with one statement. So we've seen other countries start to talk about, we want to think about nature disclosures alongside climate. Some are backtracking because of domestic politics and other things. But the big opportunity here for Australia is, let's not let the past sort of handcuff us. We can leapfrog ahead here by taking a few bold but not terribly risky policy decisions, and then mobilizing the expertise we have at company level, in the science community around CSIRO and others, in finance around project finance. We can suddenly become a leader in this space in the matter of a couple of years.
Well, let me pick up on a question I asked yesterday of both of Mark Goff from Capitals Coalition and Diane Holdorf from WBCSD, which is, I agree with all of that. But lest we all get too excited, how do we also bring consumer and community along as well? Because business gets very enthused about new market opportunity. Finance wants to fill that opportunity. How do we ensure that those at the consumption end of this and the broader civil society also feel as though they are part of the solution, as distinct from business wraps it up in a bow, tells government this is how to do it? Thoughts?
Comes down to trust and integrity.
Yep.
So I think naturally we haven't, as business, we haven't actually been seen as trustworthy in this space, that they think we've got hidden agendas. So the difference here is that, acknowledging that, but going, we truly want to do this better because the risk is too big to not do it.
Yeah.
And taking people on that journey and not just saying it, but doing it and following through with what we say we're going to do to build up that level of trust.
Transparent about it as we're
and
doing.
that's where the transparency and reporting will come, and having everyone thinking off the same sheet. We haven't got time to have academic challenge each other to do better all the time, but we also need the media to disclose what's happening honestly and transparently, and to champion the good. Sometimes it's easy just to focus on what's not happening rather than all the great stories that are coming out of business and government and NGOs and everybody.
Yeah, so, the other big asset we have in Australia, uniquely outsized for our population size, is our superannuation wealth.
Yes.
So
second largest in the world, or is it now large?
3 trillion or something.
It's not small.
I don't know the number, but if Aussies are asking their super funds, how are you investing my pension money, my super funds,
my future,
what's that going to do in terms of the resilience of our natural resources and the ability of nature to support our future economic prosperity, which is inherently aligned with the timeline of superannuation investment. If individuals ask those questions and the super industry responds, we have a supersized asset to apply to this problem in the pursuit of deploying that capital in a better direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really is driving TNFD is all those investors in super funds are hearing from their members.
Yeah.
So there's this explosion of interest from our investors saying, tell us what you're doing. Yeah. We want to be able to communicate those stories.
And we're seeing new initiatives around the world like the Make My Money Matter movements and stuff, which is encouraging and educating individuals to ask better questions of those managing their money. And if those initiatives grow, the questions and the interrogation of those managing the money improves, and then the decisions will flow around.
There's the transparency and accountability in the flows.
And consumers are voters. You know, consumers are voters. So what we saw in the last election in Australia was this big shift towards, I think the term was teal candidates, and the elevation of environmental concerns in the way people are voting. And I think if they're voting for their political representatives, then they're also going to be voting with their wallets on their superannuation funds, on the choices they make in the supermarkets, in the types of vehicles that they're buying. And hopefully in Australia, there'll be some supportive policies for further electrification, further development of domestic renewables.
And there's a recent Australian poll out that says that the appetite for action on climate has not abated even since the election. Even with the challenge of cost of living, although our unemployment rate's not doing that bad in any event, but, you know, challenges around cost of living is obviously number one, but there's no suggestion at this stage the Australian people want less action on climate, which is really quite interesting. Last question, and it is my favourite one. You're walking down the hall, you see Tanya Plibersek coming your way. She's about to go into very important negotiations to finalise this. What do you tell her? Who wants to go first?
I will.
Go.
I'll say thank you for her leadership. Like it's, you know, everyone, the ambition here is from everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm probably a bit of a fanboy, but what I'm hearing is all positive. And I see the effort that she's put into coming here and that leadership and all of the party, you know, they've put in some huge effort and hours and you're united. So I don't think we'll be walking away thinking with comment that Australia wasn't trying their best.
That they weren't putting their all in. Yep. Tony, Matthew?
I would, you know, if I had such an opportunity, then certainly it would be to speak with Tanya about, Minister Plibersek, about, you know, how the agricultural ministries, the energy ministries, the health ministries could align around food systems.
Yeah.
So let's start bringing that discussion in Australia. Yes, you say we're all crowing about how great Australia is. We're also getting a little bit big. You know, we're also this elevated.
You are quite right.
Elevated diabetes.
Yep.
So how are our food systems in Australia are impacting not just on climate but on human health?
Yep.
And to bring the health dimension and an integrated approach at the national government level for the benefit of Australia.
We are going backwards on SDG 3. You are absolutely right.
But in the same way that businesses need to embed sustainability across everything, not in a niche team, but across operations and governance and everything we do, we need that in government.
Yeah,
so that sustainability is
embedded across government, not within a silo of government.
So one health, human health, planetary health.
Thank you for that. Tony, last word.
I did actually see the minister an hour ago, but she was too far across the hallway for me to run in front of her. But what I would have said is, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Right. We've made great progress getting back to a good, credible baseline. You know, moving some of the key policy instruments in place, making better commitments globally, signing agreements like we did with the US on natural capital accounting. That's just the baseline. I'd say let's go for it.
Do more.
And if we can mobilise, to Rayne's point, if we can mobilise a sort of Team Australia approach here with the amazing scientists we have, with the knowledge that the farming community has, and some of the stuff that's already happening around data at a farm level, with policy support and then international initiatives like us, I think we can make a big dent on.
Sky is the limit. Except it's snowing, people. And on that, let me wind up by thanking so much the three of you, Tony, Rayne and Matthew. The second last G'day Montreal, the last is tomorrow. And as I said at the top, it will be with Bianca Brazil from the UNCBD and Eva Zabi from Business for Nature. But for now, Andrew Petersen signing off. Thanking very much. Bye for now.